Okay, so hi everyone. My name's Janelle Bowden. I'm your moderator for today's very first PxP Australia, a webinar for and by consumers, all about consumer involvement in research. PxP Australia is one of three regional webinars being held in the lead up to the Global PxP Conference. We had PxP Africa last week, PxP Australia today, and PxP India will be held on the 30th of August. Then we have the main 3-day conference event, which will be the second week of September, but more on that later. So Letisha, who will be sharing with you today, and I are members of the 2025 International Steering Committee for PxP that has completely designed and developed all aspects of PxP. The PxP Australia content has been developed in the same spirit by Letisha and Joan, with myself and the PxP team of Dawn Richards and Hetty Mulhall supporting. So a big shout out to Dawn and Hetty, who are behind the scenes today organising everything for us. So I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are coming today. Many of us are on unceded lands across Australia. For those joining from overseas, Australia has one of the world's oldest continuous living cultures with deep connections to land, sea and spirit. I live and work on the lands of the Wallumattagal clan of the Eora Nation on the northern shores of the Parramatta and Lane Cove rivers in Sydney. The Wallumattagal survived for thousands of years in a rich environment of river flats, creeks and mongoose swamps, fishing with spears and hand lines, feasting on shellfish and a variety of edible bush food plants. And these are images from my local area, showing you the countryside that they lived on. The Wallumattagal were the Snapper clan, and that fish, the snapper, was their totem. First set the contact in 1788 was reportedly friendly, but through clashes in the years to follow and the 1789 smallpox epidemic, very few of the Wallumattagal people ultimately survived. So I would like to pay my respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders past and present for what they've endured and their ongoing care and knowledge of our lands, and extend that respect to any of the Aboriginal people that may be joining us on the webinar today. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. In a moment, I will introduce you to our speakers for today, Letisha and Joan. They'll speak for about 30 minutes, give or take, leaving around 20 minutes or so for questions. We are recording this webinar for those who can't attend live. If you would like to add questions, we ask that you do that using the Q&A function that should be at the bottom of your screen. It's unlikely that we will see during the chat any questions that appear in the chat. But we do hope that you will engage today and use the chat to share more about yourself. Perhaps let us know where you're listening from today, as well as any other practical resources, comments or suggestions you think might be relevant to the audience. Get to know and learn each other and learn from others also treading the same path. Closed captions are available through Zoom. You can turn this on by selecting the CC button at the bottom of your screen, or maybe it'll be under the More button, and then selecting your preferred language for the captions. If you're sharing anything about the webinar on social media, please be respectful of the speakers and their well-being, particularly anything that may be personal or traumatic that they share with you today, and use the hashtag PXP25 so we can all find and connect with your content. We'd like to thank the supporters of this webinar, the Canadian Institute of Health Research, Institute of Musculoskeletal Health and Arthritis, and particularly Dawn and Hetty, who are driving this from the background late at night in Canada. So thank you to both of you for doing this in our time zone. There will be a link to the Institute in the chat if you'd like to learn more about it. Finally, a bit of a word on terminology. Consumer is an oft-used term for people engaging with the health system in Australia. We realise, however, it's not the preferred term for some, and internationally or in different settings, different words might be used, such as patient, patient partner, patient research partner, client, citizen scientist, public member. Equally, consumer involvement, as used in Australia, may be called patient engagement or public involvement elsewhere. No matter the words that you use, what's important to know is that we're all here to talk globally about how people with different types of lived and living experience are working with researchers as partners in research. So now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our presenters for today, Letisha and Dr. Joan Carlini. Letisha is a person with lived experience of stroke. She has contributed extensively as a consumer to improving health services and research, and you can see some of those activities here. Joan is a senior lecturer in marketing, but also contributes as a consumer to healthcare in health services and in an ethics committee. And I'll leave Letisha and Joan to share a little bit about their backgrounds and experiences over the next half an hour with you. A link to their bios will be provided in the chat for reference, and both are available on LinkedIn to connect with. So with that, it's over to you, Letisha and Joan. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Janelle. Hi, everyone. My name is Letisha Living, and I am a mum of 4 boys. I live on the Gold Coast in Australia. And as Janelle mentioned, there are different terms that we use when referring to ourselves as people engaging in research. So I'm going to use the word consumer when referring to my involvement in research, but if you use patient partner or lived experience, it's all the same thing. So my interest in research came about incidentally after I had a stroke. Through my journey of trying to find resources, support, and mostly to understand more about my condition and the reasons why my stroke occurred, combined with the fear of having another stroke, I discovered that there were many researchers out there that were passionate about investigating the causes, prevention, and treatment of stroke. So my journey into research initially began by participating in surveys, then structured interviews, before moving into co-design, and then later becoming a part of the investigator team. To date, I've participated in close to 30 research projects as a participant. I've been either an associate or a co-chief investigator on 7 projects and am a published co-author on 1 publication to date. So my research isn't just stroke specific, it's into the broader health and medical research where I partner with my hospital and health service and other institutes and universities around Australia. So I remember the early days when I was first beginning my own journey into research. My perceptions of researchers was that this is a scary and intimidating place. I thought that I wasn't smart enough or that I didn't deserve a place in the research team. And many times that imposter syndrome would kick in, I just felt like I wasn't good enough, or who was I to be able to participate, and where would my lived experiences be of value if I hadn't have gone to university and studied for years and years. So until my confidence sort of kicked in, and after getting to know researchers and participating, I realised that I wasn't just a tick box. I realised that I was actually valued, and that my insights, my contributions, and my lived experience was valued, and a very valuable part in shaping not just the research questions, but the research outcomes. So my experiences in Australia have led me to become really passionate about health and medical human research, in particularly genuine consumer engagement. I've seen some examples of tokenistic engagement where the consumers have been used as like that tick box to check off for application funding, but mostly with what I've seen, the vast majority of researchers are genuine about enabling consumers to be equal partners in research and co-design in all phases of their research projects. So what I found is that when researchers and consumers work collaboratively together, the result is impactful and it creates a positive flow-on effect, not to mention how it can influence policy, governance, delivery of services, and treatment outcomes. One of my most favourite projects to work on, which I reference all the time, was the Lego Serious Play study, which Jane and I are going to talk about a little bit more. I reference this study as it highlights the many layers of meaningful research participation, not just from my own and other consumer perspectives, but from the researcher's perspective too. So I'm going to hand over to Joan now, and she can introduce herself and chat a little bit more about the Lego study project.
Awesome. Thanks, Letisha. So my name's Joan Carlini. My health consumer interest actually started at age 29 when I was first diagnosed with MS. I was a healthy, 20-something person, and I guess initially I had right optic neuritis, and you can't diagnose MS on one instant. And then not long after, I had a remitting condition when I was diagnosed. So, that's pretty terrifying at age 29 to be diagnosed with MS. And so over the years, I've lived with lots of, I guess, uh, sight problems, pain, and fatigue. And over the years, I also had a lot of experience with as a patient. But I did go on to have three beautiful children. I have a boy, a girl, and another boy. And at the age of 40, I had my third child. And at that point, I actually finished my PhD in marketing as well. And after, I guess, living with MS for more than 10 years, I felt a lot of gratitude around everything that I had been able to achieve, considering what, the health trauma I had been through. So once I finished my PhD in 2016, I decided to join the consumer advisory group at my local hospital. They were advertising or promoting that they were looking for health consumers. And one of my friends shared that with me. And I went, excellent, what a fantastic opportunity for me to give back to an area where I have relied on a lot. And it was really due to the support of the health service and the doctors and the neurologists that I felt like I was able to achieve everything that I had to that point. And little was I to know that actually joining the CAG in 2016 would actually change the direction of my life. So initially I sat on governance committees and gave advice as a consumer does. But then I went on to be a consumer researcher, and I started working with nurses in end of life studies. And that's where my love of the consumer involvement. Actually, I didn't even know that there was such a thing as consumer involvement in research before that, to be honest. And so that's where my interest started, consumer involvement in research. And so from then, I've taken several routes. So some of what I do looks at consumer involvement in research and how we do it. And part of it is also around my lived experience and giving back to research. And I also I also mentor other staff like researchers on how to involve consumers in research, and I give advice on how people can improve their projects to ensure that they involve consumers in research. And I also do that as part of the ethics committee at the university where I work. So I get to look over high risk applications, and I have the opportunity to determine or assess and give advice on whether or not they could improve their consumer involvement, depending on, I guess, the vulnerability of the people that they are investigating. So that's actually been a really good opportunity to build awareness around consumer involvement in research and how it can be, I guess, improved or I guess, more collaborative research. So Letisha, I've published widely as well. I publish in marketing and health journals. And I just see that every opportunity to work with consumers as well as researchers is an opportunity to raise awareness and to improve the collaboration and what we know about collaborating. So now that I've introduced myself, we'll just move towards the Lego study that Letisha had mentioned. Did you want to share your slides, Letisha? So a little bit about the study. So when I thought about this study, we were looking to understand how consumers and researchers could work together. And so in the study, we did have a consumer who gave advice on all aspects of the study, and we had another researcher as well. And those particular people, did you want to double click, Letisha? Sorry, I don't think it's started yet. Double click. I'm not sure. I can't see it on my screen. So those researchers were practitioners of Lego Serious Play. They had done the training already, and they had suggested that a really good way to, I guess, get consumers involved would be to use this Lego Serious Play. So first of all, the study was co-developed with consumers to ensure that they were part of like asking the research question. Our consumer did actually facilitate the consumer on the research did actually facilitate the consumer session as well. And one of the reasons that we use Lego Serious Play is that it's a hands-on method where people can build 3D models with Lego bricks to express their ideas and thoughts. And so for this particular research, we did recruit through the consumer advisory groups, support networks, and neurological disorder networks as well. And in the end, we brought together 10 health consumers that were really diverse in age, conditions, non-English speaking, economic status, all different types of things. Okay, so that's a bit of background around the Lego Serious Play. So what we're going to do next is Letisha's going to talk about some of the insights that we found from consumers, and then I will talk about some of the insights that we found from researchers. So what we did do is we did have two separate groups. We had the consumers together, and then we had researchers together. So I'll hand over to Letisha.
Thanks, Jane. So what I found as a consumer coming into this project was, firstly, I needed to know that the project was going to be aligned with me. So some of those things that I needed to know was that the project was meaningful, that I was going to be respected as a participant, and that my contribution to the project would make a difference. So to ensure that the project was meaningful, or a meaningful partnership for me, I needed to first align with my values. Well, I needed it to align with my values, which it did, because I too was interested in understanding the barriers and finding strategies to the gaps that both consumers and researchers experience when it comes to genuine, meaningful, and co-designed research. I needed to know that I wasn't just a tick box that was offering tokenistic engagement, and that my contributions would be acknowledged. With the communication that I was having with Joan and the other researchers, I quickly understood that I'd be treated as a valuable contributor and that this project would be shaped with my input. I was given all of the information that I needed. What was also important to me was accessibility. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a stroke survivor, and what you probably don't know is that I have vision loss, so I can't drive, and I find navigating sometimes challenging. So the information that was shared with me made it accessible for me to participate and be in attendance in the room. So my perspectives on this project was that it was, like as Joan said, there was a really great number of participants that had many different lived experiences. It was diverse, and for that, from a consumer perspective, I knew that it was going to be a genuine project and not something that was like, a biased result. The project itself, the workshops, as you can see there on the slide, that's Lego, and it was fun. It was engaging, and I love that we used Lego to communicate our thoughts and our representations. But prior to coming into it, I thought, oh, how on earth am I going to use Lego to answer questions? And I thought, oh, I'm not sure if I can do this. But I was so surprised at how easy it became to create something that represented my thoughts. I really liked the creative aspect of this project because it got us thinking really deeper about our barriers and our solutions, but in such a fun way. So our creative brains were working not just individually, but as a group. And the workshops were fair. So you can see there that like all the sheets of paper and the Lego was there. So we're all given the same instructions, the same amount of time to build our models and the same amount of time to discuss and share our models with the group. So I loved hearing the other participants explain their Lego models. And what I found was that we all pretty much had similar experiences. We all had similar challenges and similar barriers to research participation. So what we found by this is when the environment and the intentions are right, not only do you get a really great outcome, but we formed friendships from it. Like we felt connected and comfortable with people that were strangers to us, an hour prior. So these are some of the ideas and gives you a bit of example about how we came across our key findings of the consumer needs of the group. So as a group, what we found when we were reflecting on our models, that we were actually eager to express our thoughts as consumers to close that gap and find solutions and barriers to enable effective, genuine and meaningful collaboration. So some of the must-haves that we found that were identified by the consumer group was accessible and safe in both physically and socially, the choice of meeting spaces, whether that be online, in person or hybrid. We want to be treated with dignity and valued for our contributions rather than being, statistics, that tick box that I was mentioning earlier. We want to be listened to, we want to be heard, and we want to be appreciated. And what also did come up was compensation. We want to be reimbursed for our time, as this recognises our lived experiences and our time commitment to participating in projects. I'm just going to go off script and I want to read a quote that came from one of the group, and it says, the consumer says, to work effectively, we need to be able to have chances to actually partake in bringing all those barriers down. And I feel that at a lot of times we contribute our voices, but then after that, it just gets cut off. I think it's important to be able to communicate and get feedback and actually see what progress is done instead of it going into nothingness. So just communication and not being like, push today, thanks again, bye. And then nothing happens. So that was some feedback from one of the consumers in the group. And the reason that I wanted to say that is because, sometimes I've had that experience myself. We find that we come in, we participate in the project, but then we don't hear anything again. So we do like to know what that feedback is regarding our input. And we want that either by email, phone call, or a copy of the publication. So I'm just going to go back to Joan now, and she can chat a little bit more about how things were from the researchers' side.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Letisha. No, can you go back to that last one? Okay, I'll talk through this. Yeah. So I was present for both the consumer as well as the researcher sessions. They were held on 2 separate days. So normally co-design you would hold together like multi-stakeholder, but our consumer co-researcher said, no, actually, let's hold them separate because we want everyone to be able to speak freely. And so we listened to our consumer, and that's what we did. And so, as Letisha had mentioned, the consumer session was really amazing, and we were able to find out, all of those things that consumers wanted. So just to recap again, it was really amazing. They wanted nature. They wanted to be outside. Accessibility, yes. So, trains or public transport, lifts, and even in our session, one of the consumers said, oh, look, my wheelchair is not fitting under this desk properly, and the lights were too bright. And so it really, even though I had been part of consumer involvement in research for a long time, for many years, in fact, a lot of this was really new to me. And I'm just like, wow, you know, there's actually a lot of requirements that I didn't even consider. In the morning, I'd put posters everywhere. It was held at the university where I work, which is across the road from the health service, which is at 2 tram stops. So we thought that this was a good location for all of those reasons. But luckily the consumers did have my phone number, so I was able to go down to the car park and meet them and bring them back. But all of these things were really important. And so understanding that consumers have a lot of needs that need to be met to be included in research, what actually came from this research was how challenging, I guess, it is for a researcher to balance all of the consumers' needs, balance their own like emotional well-being and physical well-being, and as well as I guess making sure they have all of their, I guess, academic requirements as well. So the list on the right-hand side is actually the requirements, the job demands for researchers. So that model you can see, I used a theory called job demands resources. So on the left-hand side, it's what the consumers, their demands and their resources that they bring to consumer involvement and research. This is published and you can get a copy easily online when we can share the link. And on the right-hand side was the job demands for researchers. So definitely what we found was, so like, as I said, Letisha's talked about the consumers, but for the researchers, we found that their workload pressures were quite intense. They had emotional challenges around managing and making sure it was a safe space for consumers, but also trying to manage their own emotional resources as well. Ethical complexity around and involving consumers and making sure it's fair and equitable. Support structures in their organisation are not always set up to support consumer involvement. For example, for this particular project, I gave vouchers, Visa cards as reimbursement, but actually that's quite hard to achieve as well. And also with researchers, where I guess we're critiqued on the number of publication and the quality of those publications that we have every year, as well as grants. And supporting consumers is like a really silent part of our work. And I guess that was part of the things that we found as well, is that universities and possibly health services are not, their support structures are not probably set up to support their researchers, to making sure that there is that genuine level of engagement of consumers. So that was really a massive finding for me. So even though I'd been involved in involving consumers in research for many years as a consumer as well as researchers, it probably didn't really dawn on me just the extent of challenges that researchers had to make sure that they supported consumers so that consumers could be involved in the way that they wanted to be involved. Okay. So we're just going to move on now to the next section, Letisha, if you want to click. So from this particular research, so from the Lego Serious Play, we worked out that consumers have lots of demands and resources that they bring to the table, and researchers have lots of demands that they contend with as well. Letisha, are you there? Are you able to change to the next slide? So what we did,
I'm just having some tech challenges.
So what we did next was we took all this information. So the team published this particular paper, and part of that process, we supplied all the co-designers with a 24-page report written in a way that everyone could understand, as well as some emails thanking the team and inviting feedback as well. So we closed that particular loop. I didn't think that we had done quite enough. So I really wanted to develop a tool that would help consumers and researchers work together. Just a checklist one, Letisha. And so I say but actually it's all part of a team. Okay. Like, yes, I did a lot of the work, but it's always part of a team. We're always talking about how to do it. So what we did was we took what consumers had said about how they wanted to be engaged, and use this theory called empowerment theory. So empowerment theory has had its critics, but also empowerment theory is about how people can gain control, confidence, and power over the decisions that they make. And so I sort of thought, if I've got what consumers say they need and what they already have, maybe I could apply this empowerment theory and come up with a checklist. So the checklist is in front of you, and we can share it more broadly as well. It has not been published yet, so I'd be happy to have some feedback. But in short, because we've got a few extra things that Letisha will cover at the end of this as well. So the checklist was broken into the 4 sections of empowerment. And so initially it was aimed at consumers. So I wanted consumers to be able to empower themselves in understanding what they bring to the research table and things that they could negotiate. The reviewers said to me, well, you're just putting the burden on consumers. And so then I rethought this and went, okay, actually that's quite right. But how about this checklist be a tool where researchers and consumers can have a conversation about how they're going to contribute? So the first section, which is in blue that you probably can't see, is around understanding the consumer's perspective and understanding their own lived experience and how that experience is relevant to the research. The competence bit, which is the bit in green, is consumers' confidence and skills to engage effectively, supported by clear communication, access, and resources. So this is really important. This is where, like Letisha was talking about, having, limited vision. Well, how do you need support? Do I provide you with text before the meeting so that you can have a screen reader? Do you want to attend in person? Would you prefer that it's, held online? So these are the types of conversations that this checklist can encourage. The self-determination, which is the section in orange, consumers' autonomy to make choices about their involvement, including setting boundaries and negotiating their roles. This is really important because as a researcher, we don't want to predetermine your involvement. Okay. I don't want to think, oh, poor Jo, she's got a neurological problem. I don't want to overburden her, so I'm not going to send her that information. That's not the way that, researchers should work. It should be around a conversation. Jo, how do you want to participate in this research? To what extent should I be sending you this information? And also really important in that part is, if Jo's health changes, I should be able to say, you know what, I'm not well, even though I committed to this, I've changed my mind and I want to draw back. And letting, I guess, consumers know that that's totally fine as well. You can change your mind about how you want to contribute at any time. And finally, the impact piece. So the piece at the bottom is around, I love to celebrate every win. So every time, something goes right or wrong, we can celebrate it. And also about making sure that we acknowledge our consumers in publications and those types of things as well. So that's the start of this checklist, and that was like a major outcome out of this Lego series play. I'll hand over to Letisha, who's just going to talk a little bit more.
Thanks, Joan. So I'll just give some of my own insights around this checklist first. So for me as a consumer participating in research, so I've begun to understand my own limitations, but that's only been because I've been doing it for many years. So my limitations are around accessibility, time commitments, competing priorities, my own values, and what I expect from my personal engagement. So things that I would need would be effective communication, feedback, recognition. But in reference to this checklist, for me, mostly it's about, it's the yellow one there, that self-determination. How do I show up? So, because outside of my consumer engagement, I'm a mother, I have my own interests, I have other consumer and lived experience engagements, I've got projects that I'm working on, and other things in my life. So, I need to establish boundaries so that I don't burn out. So, for me to be able to work effectively in research participation, I need my researchers to know that maybe I can't respond straight away to an email, or maybe not even that day at all. I may need extra reading time for papers and things for meetings. I may need them to compromise, as Joan was saying. If, for example, we've planned to show up at a certain time, but life gets in the way sometimes, I need to know that the researcher is flexible and can work with me. So what I love mostly about this checklist is that it opens the door for researchers to really get to know and understand the needs of the consumers that they're partnering with. So this can be so completely individualized, as each consumer can have different needs. Like, for example, I've said accessibility a few times. So for that could be someone may require online access, whereas another may see accessibility as wheelchair accessible, or another may require carer support or a communication partner to attend with them. So this checklist opens doors for researchers to understand, and not just understand, but to meet the needs of their consumers so that they can meaningfully participate and contribute to research, and that the research itself is inclusive. So even though, like Joan has mentioned all of her things from her side, from my side, still, like, as a consumer, even though we're working together, our needs are conflicting. The needs are conflicting between researchers and consumers, like policies, for example. So we know that change just doesn't happen because we want it to happen or we need it to happen. So change happens because the evidence says it should, and collecting that evidence takes time. So structural and organisational processes and policy change takes time, and we can't make those changes until we do collect that evidence first. So as I said previously, as consumers, what we can do to help with those structural and organisational changes and policy changes is that we can take our lived experiences to help develop new research questions to help guide the changes that we want to see. So I'm just going to throw it back over to Joan quickly if there's anything else that you want to add to that, or we can go to Q&A.
No, I'm happy to go to questions because I can see there's lots of questions there. So happy to take questions. So, yep.
Letisha and Joan, that was really interesting, and you've done some really interesting work there with that kind of needs assessment for researchers and consumers, as well as the checklist. I am going to run through the questions that have come in to the chat. So the first was from Brian, and he was asking who facilitated the consumer focus groups.
So the consumer focus group was facilitated by our consumer that was on the research team. She had experience in Lego Serious Play, and it was actually her idea to use that method. So I was pretty happy to hand over to her. But in saying that, she was supported by myself, another researcher, as well as another person. So although that she facilitated it, there was still 4 of us in the room that were supporting her.
Yeah. Thanks, Joan. And Letisha, maybe a question for you. You mentioned about the importance of reimbursement and being valued for your time and expertise and experience. A question from Kate is, do you have any recommendations around sitting fees for different levels of consumer involvement in research?
So they're guided by the state or network that you're involved with. So, for example, I'm in Queensland, so there's a Health Consumers Queensland reimbursement. If you're in New South Wales, there'll be a New South Wales Health Consumers reimbursement and then there's different amounts depending on different levels. So, as a research participant or as a high level consumer ongoing consultant, those different rates will be different. But you can check in with the different states they've got it listed on their websites for their guidelines on how to reimburse consumers.
Thank you. There was lots of interest, Joan, in seeing that checklist. So I've said in the chat that maybe we'll work with you to figure out how the PxP team can circulate it to the attendees. But just to put you on notice around that.
Oh, no,
I don't know if you have any comments on that.
No, look, I'm really happy, to be honest. So we're in the process of publishing that in a marketing journal. The journal is really keen to increase consumer involvement in research. But working with PxP, I'm happy to share that checklist and happy to take your feedback directly. So I'll make sure that my email address is part of that. So absolutely, we'll get it out to everyone.
And we do have all our email addresses at the end of the webinar as well, so people can take a note of those. Can I ask you a question actually about the checklist? I love the idea. I think it's really important we have tools that can open those conversations for really meaningfully understanding each other's needs. One of the things, and I tussle with this myself, so I'm interested in your views, is how do we set expectations that maybe we can't do everything that you need? Sometimes there's just there may be some reasons why we can't have hybrid meetings, or there may be some reasons why we can't facilitate a particular need. How do we have those honest conversations to say, we're trying to do this as inclusively as we can. I just can't do that for you, and I'm really sorry, but maybe this isn't the project for us to work together on. We'll find another one, but I can't do it this time. How do we make sure that we're also managing expectations?
Yeah, I think expectations is a really important part of consumer involvement and research. And I think probably the biggest issue for researchers is that they've actually never been trained in this relationship type of, basically the relationship. And so I did a study a long time ago where a lot of the researchers that I interviewed were foundation scientists. And back then I didn't even know what a foundation scientist was. And so these people are in their labs splitting cells or doing whatever they do. And so when I talked to them about consumer involvement in research, they were like, well, I don't understand how that could benefit me or my research since I'm splitting cells. And so it did I guess it did make me sort of think about, wow, you know what? These people have never been trained in these skills. And it's a really big ask to say, hey, this is really important in 2025. You need to be able to do it. Otherwise, you're not going to be getting any of your grant funding and all of these types of things. And so the reason I say this is because I guess it is a real important skill, and we probably need to think about, yes, current researchers need to be developing these skills around managing relationships with consumers, but also I think we need to go back into the honours programs and bachelor programs and start to introduce who consumers are, what value they bring, and actually how you can talk to consumers. And you're absolutely right, it is around managing expectations. And that's where I guess that checklist can help. When Letisha and I were talking, it's about, you know what, you might not hear from a researcher in 6 months because in the background they're doing all sorts of things. And I guess we just need some open communication and maybe even setting up that transparency in the research process around, this is what the research project will look like. This is how we're going to communicate with you. And we might not actually achieve a lot of the outcomes that you're wanting. And that's why I think some consumers drop out because they go, well, actually, this isn't what I signed up for. I thought that if I joined this project, I was going to see these really amazing outcomes for people who live with the condition I live with, and that didn't happen. And I think that's what Letisha was getting at earlier. Evidence-based outcomes takes a long time to build that evidence. And so it could be like 5 years or whatever until you sort of see some outcomes in that area. So I guess helping raise awareness in both sides, that for consumers, that you might not see the outcomes that you want for a long time, but it's really around that relationship and guiding that relationship in the right way.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just add something to that? Sorry,
please.
Janelle, I just want to quickly add something from a consumer perspective, just going back to your question again, how can we do that? I love, Joan, what you said. But for me as a participant, I recognise that I'm coming in to your project. This is your project. This is your study. You're inviting me in. So it's just about being a human and understanding that the researcher is a human, that I'm a human. We're not always going to get it right. So if it is about finding the values there and making sure they connect at the very beginning before you start getting weeks and months into the project and then go, oh, hang on a minute, this just isn't working. So finding that out from the very beginning, having that conversation, using that checklist. Is it online? Do I need to be there in person? What days are the meetings? Will I be compensated or reimbursed for my time? So having that discussion up at the beginning. And if it doesn't work, just realize we're all human. My needs may be different to your needs might be different to mine. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't work. So that's from a consumer perspective, understanding and respecting the researcher, their role, and that they're inviting us to be part of their projects.
I think you said something a little insightful there, Letisha, around the fact that we all recognize that we are humans and bringing that vulnerability on both sides. So the consumers are vulnerable, but the researchers also need to be vulnerable and realize that to work together, we are humans. So I think that's really insightful. A couple of other questions have come in. Joan, Letisha, I'll throw to both of you. What are some of the Australia or region-specific developments that you're seeing in consumer involvement in research? Don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Letisha, did you want to go first? No, I'll go first. So my perspective is from a university as well as from a consumer advisory group. There is like rising interest in consumer involvement in research. I get contacted by lots of different researchers just needing help, needing some mentorship. They're putting together research projects and they don't know the first thing about involving consumers in research. They know it's important, but they don't know what to do and how to do it. So I guess I've been doing it for a while. And so I find that, I guess, a little bit surprising, but just reminding myself, that a lot of people are not trained in this. And so, it is becoming more important. Health services are adopting it as part of Standard 2, partnering with consumers. The NMHRC, it's part of those conditions as well. Almost all their grants must have the consumer involvement in research, and it needs to be documented. So definitely within Australia, there is rising importance and more researchers are trying to understand what it is and how to do it well. I'll hand over to Letisha.
Thanks, Joan. Sorry, I'm having tech issues today. I couldn't get my audio off. I agree with what you're saying there. The consumer involvement in research, I'm seeing it a lot more, but maybe it's because it's becoming mandatory now that researchers do need to involve consumers in their projects, not just as tick box, but in all phases of the project design and co-design. But also what I'm seeing is that consumers themselves are more interested in participating as well. I'm not sure why, but in my stroke-specific niche, I've seen, a lot of people who don't get access to NDIS, for example. And so we know therapy is expensive. And one of those ways that you can access therapy is through participating in research. So I think there's like lots of different shifts there where, the incentive to involve consumers, but also for the consumers to partner with is there, and it's shaping those different partnerships.
Thanks for that. Anthony has a couple of questions for you. One I think is perhaps a comment, and that is the fact that sometimes the technology that research institutes use is not the same technology as consumers use. So if we think PC and Macs, and there can be some inflexibility from research institutes to help consumers to upgrade to use the right technology. So I'll probably take that one as a comment, but Anthony has said that he finds that some clinicians involved in research treat consumers as a tick box for their research funding and don't listen well to consumer input. And how do we overcome this? If we could answer that, but I'm giving you the hardest question ever. Joan, do you want to have a stab at that first?
Yeah, look, I think synthesizing consumer input into research is really, 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 really tough. And it really depends on the project that you're working on as well. I mean, the project that we presented here was aimed at synthesizing perspectives, right? So it was pretty straightforward. That was the aim of the research. But it's not only about synthesizing consumer perspectives, it's also about when you have a seat at the table as a consumer, you're bringing your perspectives, and you're changing the dynamics in the room as well. All of a sudden, the consumer is top of mind, like the end user. So you're changing the conversations as well. So there's a lot of things that happen by you having a seat at the table that you don't know about. Like if researchers are talking and the consumer or the end user's there, we're not going to talk about the end user as, not like a nobody, but like it's just something. You're there, you've got a face. So I think it is really important not to only focus about the outcome, also focus on the process as well. You being there means that consumers are represented at every stage of the research process, which is really important. For the researcher, I guess synthesizing insights is a skill, and it's about relationships. And maybe in this current project, you might feel that your input was limited. So, for example, in the Wiser Wound Care Centre for Research Excellence that I'm part of, one of the consumers during a project had a really excellent comment about, well, there's all these policies, but how do we know that they're used? So that insight was not necessarily synthesized in that research. But the next project that was started by the researcher was actually about analysing policies and use in hospitals. So that comment actually spurred the next research question. So I guess I sort of answered that in a bit of a muddy way, but yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Letisha, did you want to add anything to that? No, all good. So we have possibly what's a comment here, but it might I might flip into the question that I've sent you during the chat as well as part of this. So Anne's making a comment really about the need to ensure we've got a diversity of voices, tone, and interests being involved in research. That we need to be bold, blunt, and direct, while also kind of maintaining, those relationships and the talk and working together. I think for me, we are still at a phase where this is not well known in the community sector, that this is a role that people can have to be involved in research. And so I'd be interested in your views, perhaps Joan and Letisha. How do we get that diversity of people interested? How do we let the community know that research is something that they can be involved in? It's not so scary, and their insights could be incredibly valuable because of the diversity of their lived experience.
Yeah, so since I started with the Consumer Advisory Group, this has been on my mind about how do you raise awareness of this within the community. because unless you do, you're not going to get the diversity of voices. And so I have raised awareness personally by entering like online support groups, in-person support groups. I post things to social media, personal social media, but raising awareness around it in more professional sense in LinkedIn as well, championing it at every point, as well as nowadays writing about it in journals. And so actually in health, it's more common, but in marketing, I'm promoting it in that sense. But in the community, so I've got a new project which I hope to get up, and it's specifically around LGBTIQ plus. And what I'm wanting to do is have like co-design sessions with that particular group of people to understand what their needs are around getting involved. And so trying to, I guess, answer that question directly, basically saying, you know, where could we talk about this, that we could raise awareness? If you were aware of it, what would you need to be involved? Would you want blogs, videos, tools, all of these types of things? So that's actually where the direction I'm heading next. And if anyone's got any help for me, feel free to put it in the chat field. So I haven't started that particular project, but that's the next project that I would like to be working on. So looking at that particular group to start with, but also moving into some other groups, trying to understand trying to understand more generally about where do these people look for this information and how could we appropriately raise awareness around research, but also governance, because governance is important as well, because you can start to shape the health services that your group receives in that way as well, whereas research is like those further off types of outcomes.
Right. Letisha, did you have any other comments about how we get the word out? And then we might wrap up for the day.
I'll just keep it super quick then. It's just generally through the sharing of information. So you start with your small network and build out. So one voice can become many voices, sharing to social media. Those shares then get shared, sharing into the groups, doing it through websites, wherever there's an opportunity for many eyes to see your message.
So what I hear there is that, you know, we can each take personal responsibility for expanding public awareness of this through our individual efforts as well. Thank you both. That was, I thought it was a really amazing and insightful and valuable session. I hope the audience did too. And if you did, I'd welcome you to show your love to the speakers through the react button or through the chat. I'm just going to finish us off now if I can figure out how to share my slides appropriately. Sorry, Deb, I haven't got to that question for you. Hopefully that's sharing now. Okay. As I promised at the start, I'd like to just wrap up by encouraging you to register for the PxP conference. This is just the start of the kinds of conversations you'll hear over 3 days by patients for patients. It's the 3rd year it's run. It's always a really interesting event. It reminds me, though, that though we are global, we face many of the same issues everywhere. And this conference is really an opportunity to connect with other like-minded people and talk about the how and the changes needed to progress the involvement of lived experience in research. The live sessions on day 1 and 2 are not particularly friendly to our time zone. So this year, for the first time, we're trying something new. And we're having rewatch sessions on day 1 and 2 at a time less sleep depriving for our South Pacific region. So when you register, you will have the option to select which two of the 3 recorded sessions being held earlier in the day, as the last session's not recorded each day, that you would like to rewatch. And then the most popular sessions, Letisha and I will be online for to rewatch, to engage with you via the chat as we do rewatch them. As in the past, day 3 will be in our time zone, so you get the advantage of hearing those sessions live. Letisha will be the host for the day, and I'll be moderating the last session. So as mentioned, this year there is a lot of lived experience from around the world that's involved and has contributed to developing the program for this year and inviting the speakers that you'll hear from. It really is an international group from all over the globe. So do pop online to register, and again, I'm sure Hetty will pop a link in the chat if you can't engage with that QR code. As mentioned earlier, there is a PxP India happening in, I guess, nearly 2 weeks' time. If you're interested in that, you can register online for that as well. And then finally, we are all online and available to connect with you through LinkedIn or through our emails. Please feel free to share with us any feedback or thoughts you might have about today's webinar, so we know if this is something the PxP team should do again next year. And with that, almost made it on time. I will close for today. Thank you again, Letisha and Joan, for a great presentation, and we'll see you another time, hopefully online for PxP in September. Please spread the word. Thank you.